Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to Buena Vista Farm. I've been watching a lot of videos on YouTube. So my basic thesis is the environmental problem is solved. We just need to implement. But I've been changing my mind a little bit with the videos I've been posting and some other videos I've been watching. I've been watching a lot of channels. Now, we started along with my wife in about 2012. Prior to that, I had taken a permaculture design course, and we were on our way. We got in 2013 some land, and we started to transform it. I quickly came across the problem that I still see today, and that is a jargon problem. I watched some videos and I made some notes here. I usually speak extemporaneously, but there's so many different jargon. Even starting with permaculture and their favorite food forest or forest gardening, Syntropic Agroforestry. That's a big one today, and I've watched some videos about how to design a Syntropic Agroforestry system, and it's really interesting. Even I'm watching a couple of channels where they've applied Syntropic Agroforestry to the temperate climates. Very interesting. But we also can't forget regenerative agriculture and the mob grazing, the pastured poultry profits of Joel Salatin. This is all in holistic management, which came out of Africa. And we also came at this from ecological restoration angle. And I had talked a lot about agroforestry systems, but ecological agriculture is a big one. Maybe it doesn't include trees. There was the Japanese guy, Fukuoka, and in the 70s he had a great system in Japan, and everybody was so excited. Well, a French lady tried it out in France. It didn't work at all, but she modified it and came up with synergistic gardening, right? And so we've got holistic, synergistic. Oh, don't get me started on biodynamic farming, right? And so, and most recently, I found a video in Ethiopia. They're making great progress in Ethiopia, and the guy there calls his system FMNR. And you might see the video on YouTube how they reforested 2,700 hectares without planting a single tree. How did they do it? FMNR, Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration. And so there's so many words and titles, and you might think that we're still debating about how this all works. My thesis is that we know how this works. All we got to do is implement it. But where's the challenge? Where's the stick up here? Why are there so many words on my piece of paper that I need paper to remember them all? Well, the thing is, every ecosystem is different. Every farm, every piece of land is different. There's few variables: elevation, slope, temperature, rainfall, seasonality. But with those few variables, every piece of land is different, and what works on some land doesn't work on others. Recently I was sharing, about a year ago, I was sharing an article I wrote that documented these solutions in China, in India, in Australia, in the United States. The problem is solved. We have the solutions, we just need to implement them. And somebody said to me, a really smart guy that I like and respect, and I of course still like and respect him, he said to me, don't forget, if you're going to make that work, you need cows. Well, I've been at this 12 years with my wife and my team, and we've never used cows, and we've done great work without cows. Why does this guy think that I need cows? Why is he telling me I'm doing something wrong? Well, I thought about it a lot, and it turns out if you understand holistic management and the mob grazing, here in Colombia they call it PUAD, Pastoreo de Ultra Alta Densidad, you might think that you need cows to stimulate the regenerative agriculture, right? Cows transform grasses and they break it down and make it more available to the soil. Well, I don't use cows, but I use fungi. So I think one thing to remember about ecosystems is every organism serves multiple functions, and every function should be served by multiple organisms. That's a permaculture principle. And so, well, we don't have cows. We do have some animals that eat leaves and fruits and poop. But our main organism that breaks down the woody matter into soil life on our farm, in our situation, is fungi. And so you could take a look up here. We've got the biomass. We've been going through this forest here on this corner. We've been making some decisions. We've been pruning a lot, and we've got all sorts of these piles of woody material, some leaves, but it's a lot of woody material. We do harvest some firewood, some of the best trunks and branches we take for firewood, but a lot of it ends up piled up. I don't know if you can see here this contour. We're below one of the principal contours, and it's full of wood, and on top of that, biomass. And so what are we doing here on this corner? I don't know if you can come over here and see. This ends up being a steep slope down to the camino, down to the road. And so we are thinking, you know, what would be our product here? So far, this kind of corner has become somewhat abandoned in favor of other areas which are a little easier to manage, like right above where we're at and below where we're at. But this corner has been kind of abandoned, and so I came in to this forest, and I've been thinking about specifically all this jargon, and I get to watch the verticality of these trees. What is the species, for example, that we really like? So we've observed these species, native species. Mostly we haven't planted anything here. We're in other areas. We've done more of like the Syntropic, where you come in and you plant all the species you want. On this corner, we haven't done that. We've kind of allowed the native species, the birds, to plant. And over the years, we've discovered some of the native species which we think are very promising. And so I'll show you, for example, this one, and there's a lot of, here's a little guy, but this is a viburnum, a cabo de hacha. Now he's hiding behind some old coffee and some red chilco, and of course the niguitos, they spread out, and they're always fun to prune because they get hooked in everything. But this cabo de hacha, this viburnum, is a native species that we believe we can crop by coppicing. We can coppice handles and posts, fence posts, and different wood products. And so this is starting to emerge naturally. We've allowed some big ones. The birds eat the seeds. They love these seeds. They also call it the Andean elder, or elder de monte, sauco de monte. This viburnum, we believe we can make a crop out of it. And now that it's appeared, we are also taking cuttings out of the native ones that we never planted, and we're planting additional species. But this little corner, this observational deck, you might call it, the observational space, has allowed us to kind of get to know our ecosystem better. When you start with certain methods where you densely plant all the plants that you want, you don't necessarily give space for the native plants. You might not understand them. In temperate climates, and that's another thing, permaculture started in Australia, went quickly to Europe. The United States has made some great, with the mob grazing and stuff, has made some great progress. A lot of people have a lot of species lists. These are the species. If you're going to start a permaculture food forest in Australia, you could download a bunch of species lists, and you can buy them. You could get them shipped to your land, and you could plant all those species. But in Colombia, in our area, it wasn't so clear to me that anybody had ever made species lists. Yes, I can import mulberries from other places, but what are the species here locally? We talked to a lot of locals, we did a lot of interviews, and we learned a lot about the native plants. And so how can we use those, the plants that want to be here, the plants that evolved here, to our greatest advantage? And so far, one of the greatest advantages of using native species is to be attracting birds. The birds are the greatest allies we've had so far. There are a lot of mammals, but the birds bring in seeds. And so they plant this first generation of espadero, of cabo de hacha, and below them, one of the things we're seeing is a new secondary generation. This laurel tree requires shade, right? When we started, we identified the Cavaliaceae viburnum, and we planted it in direct sunlight, in dense plantings, so they would, all go up together. But the Cavaliaceae, the viburnum, failed, and I suspect that this laurel would fail too. It has evolved and it has developed to need the shade of a primary recovery forest, a secondary forest. It needs the shade and the canopy so that it grows straight and penetrates the canopy. And so for the viburnum, this is absolutely necessary for our crop. We don't need a bunch of scraggly branches. What we need is straight and tall fence posts or tool handles that we can harvest and coppice and let it resprout. So an important thing for us that we learned in this quarter is in our climate, in our topography, what we need is to start quickly developing a canopy layer with which we can then send some higher value species, whether they appear to us from the birds or whether they're the ones that we pick. And the multiplying effect of that is that when the birds help you plant, the Cavaliaceae, for example, it took us many years. We didn't have very many of them. But now the birds have spread them all out over the farm. Anyone that appears where I don't want it, I can transplant or break it up into several cuttings, plant it in another area. The propagation. This viburnum is not available in any local nurseries, except perhaps ours, now that we've identified it as a promissory species. So it depends where you're getting started, your local ecosystem. We didn't have a bunch of native nurseries around here in Columbia. We developed one, and that is a great tool as you're getting started. But our conditions were different than that in Australia and the United States. We can't mob graze cattle on these steep slopes. So all of these different words, these jargon, what they really are strategies, right? The overall principles of ecosystem restoration and profitable ecosystem restoration, whether we want to call it agroforestry systems or we want to call it regenerative agriculture, we can restore ecosystems profitably. We can identify species that bring value to us, and we can leave enough value so that it enriches the ecosystem and the biodiversity. And that's what I'd like to go over in this series. I'd like to kind of set the jargon aside, or maybe use each of these things for what they're good for, recognize their time and place for each of these strategies, and try to draw the connections, bring together the different ideas so that we have an overarching framework and we're not fighting amongst ourselves over a bunch of jargon. So, see you next time.